All righty. Well, welcome everyone to our Tuesday talk. I'm Michael Robinson, the career coach here at Easter Seals Veteran Staffing Network, VSN for short. I'll be your host and presenter. In this session, we're going to be discussing how to write effective cover letters. But before I begin with that, I'm going to take a moment to cover some housekeeping items. This webinar should last about 45 minutes with a live 15-minute Q&A session at the end. If you have any questions, please pop those into the chat. I'll break periodically to address them if I see a lot being chatted. Lastly, let us know how we're doing by please filling out the end of session survey. Here's a little bit about me. I'm a retired Marine. A majority of my post-military career has been in HR. I've held positions as a hiring manager, recruiter, and a career counselor. And in my previous position, I worked exclusively with military members moving into the civilian workforce as a employment facilitator for the Transition Assistance Program. Many of you know that as TAP. And during that time, I taught more than 100 workshops to over 2,000 transitioning service members. Now, please allow me to introduce the VSN to you. Our staff understands the employment challenges that veterans and military spouses face because we too are veterans and military spouses also. We've matched over 2,700 qualified candidates to employers to fill temporary to permanent, contract, and direct hire positions. The fees from those placements are then reinvested into the coaching services, which has allowed the VSN to have coached more than 15,000 veterans, wounded warriors, and military spouses. And this leads me to where I fit in. Our career coaching just isn't about landing a new job. It's about helping people discover what they need in work to be truly happy so that they can contribute meaningfully, and hopefully they won't be looking for work for a very, very long time. Our process is to help people gain clarity on their career by understanding the core aspects of the employment process, what you see here on the slide. Then they can take control of their job search and reach those career goals. As such, we can help you write effective cover letters. This is what we're going to be covering today for this session. We're going to talk about the purpose of the cover letter, the format, the structure, key elements, as well as how to include a referral, salary requirements if that's requested, how to mention relocation, as well as when not to include a cover letter. Firstly, the purpose of the cover letter. Broadly speaking, it's there to introduce you to the employer. It's your first introduction. And it is there to go over your background briefly and your experience. Now, many people just take and copy and paste information from their resume into the cover letter. And that's really not the purpose of the cover letter. The cover letter is a complement to your resume. It is not a carbon copy of it. So if that's what you've been doing in the past, please don't do that anymore. And it also states your interest in the position, as well as how your skills align with the company's what they're looking for and how you can assist them in their problem. Because if they're posting a position, then they obviously have a situation that they need to have fixed, and you could quite possibly be that fix, but you have to show that. And then it showcases your communication skills. It is a communication piece. Many people put on their resume that they're great communicators. Well, your resume and your cover letter are the items that will speak to that. It is you're writing to convince the reader to pick up the phone and give you a call. So therefore, it is a persuasive argument in your marketing items. The cover letter also explains your relationship with someone that may have referred you. And we'll talk about that a little bit deeper as we get into the session. A question I get quite often: do recruiters read cover letters? And the answer to that, when I was recruiting, I can't remember a time that I did actually read a cover letter. Now, most recruiters don't read cover letters because they're focused on qualifying the individual for the position. And that qualification is the resume. So they're mainly focused on the resume. Now, those that may be selected for the interview, well, they might go through and read those. But do they read all cover letters? The answer to that question is probably going to be no. And then, so just keep in mind, the cover letter isn't specifically written for the recruiter, it is actually for the hiring manager. So the question is, do hiring managers read cover letters? And the answer to that is maybe, maybe not. You're never going to know if your cover letter is being read or not. So in some instances, the position actually dictates if the cover letter probably will be written. A lot of entry-level positions their cover letters are read because they don't have a whole lot of work experience. And then senior leadership positions, well, that's kind of expected that if you're applying to a senior leadership position, then the cover letter will follow that. So larger organizations may only read those that are selected for interviews. Smaller organizations may read all of theirs. If the hiring manager is going to read your cover letter, what are they generally looking for? They are looking for company specifics, whether or not you did your research. They're looking for actions and results in your accomplishments. What did you achieve in your last experience or throughout your career? It needs to be short and succinct, but detailed enough to convey your value. Definitely professional quality, error-free, no grammar mistakes and no spelling mistakes. And then, of course, how well do you fit into the company culture? So one thing that the cover letter does that the resume doesn't, because resumes are very strictly kind of formatted and kind of blah, but your cover letter can actually present your personality, whereas the resume can't necessarily do that. So those are the primary differences between the resume and the cover letter. So why would you need to have a cover letter? Employers may require it. The cover letter can explain a lot of things that the resume just can't do. Employment gaps, if you have those, many people do, that is a great way to talk about briefly an employment gap. The motivation to change careers if you're a career changer. And then how well your skills align with that particular role. If there is a mismatch, and oftentimes the resume just doesn't explain it well enough, the recruiter or the hiring manager could be looking at the resume and they just may not get the answer they're looking for. That's where the cover letter comes in. It kind of connects the dots. Why are you applying to this particular position if you have skills in that other type of job or type of field? And then, of course, your suitability for that position, back to that culture fit. But in many other times, if you are looking for a work from home position, many organizations are looking for individuals that have that experience in working from home. So that's another place where you could possibly convey that compatibility. From here, now that we've talked about why that cover letter is important, we're going to go over the format and structure of the cover letter. If you have been in any of my other Tuesday talks, I talk extensively about the resume and its format. The cover letter format is akin to, it is really a business letter. And if you've never written a business letter, it is actually fairly simple. But the key thing that we want to do is make sure that we use the same font that we use on our resume. Many people forget about this. And this is a matter of attention to detail. So whatever you use on your resume, make sure you use it on your cover letter. And then use something that is conventional, nothing too crazy, unless you are in a artsy kind of field. Well, then you may be able to experiment a little bit. However, that's what your online portfolios are for. So you may want to just stick to a conventional font. And make sure that you don't go below 10.5. If you need a magnifying glass to read it, you have to remember some people still print these out. Yes, you can enlarge it on the screen, but we want to make sure that it's easy to read. So anything below 10 and the only inside your body 12-point font, your name is going to be the largest on the document. And again, whatever you use as far as the header is concerned, and I'll talk about that here in a moment, make sure you use that same with your contact information in your cover letter. Spacing, everything's single spaced except for between paragraphs. That will be, everything will be single spaced. And then the space between the closing and signature, that will be 4 spaces, as you can see here in the slide. PDF or Word document. So if you're emailing it as an attachment, you probably would want to use it in the PDF format. It just holds that structure so much better. If you are uploading it to a applicant tracking system, you can use either or. Naming your file, keep it simple. Use your first name, your last name, the job title, and the words cover letter at the end. And we want to keep it to 1 page. So anywhere from 200 to 400 words should roughly keep that within that single page. And then lastly, if you use a template for your resume, you want to use a complementary or matching template for your cover letter. This is very important. Remember, that was a little attention to detail kind of things. From here, I want to move to the key components. And generally speaking, it is very simple. You have a header. Your header is going to be your contact information, the employer's contact information, the greeting. Believe me, we'll talk about that here in a moment. That's very, very important. The cover letter body, 3 to 4 paragraphs. These are short paragraphs, maybe 2 to 3 sentences, 4 at the max. Remember, you have that page. And then, of course, the sign off. Starting with the header, the contact information is very important. You wouldn't believe how many people don't get this actually correct. And I do have a question. What if I don't have a name? I'm not sure that I understand that. Could you expound upon that here in a moment? So your name is definitely going to be on the top. Remember, it's going to be the biggest. You want to use the same name that you use across all of your documents. And then, so if, for example, maybe I use Mike on Facebook, but I use Michael in LinkedIn. LinkedIn is what I'm using for my job search. So I'm going to make sure that Michael and Michael are across all of my marketing documents. And then I'm going to make sure that my security settings on my Facebook page are set so that I can have easy control of that. And then, of course, the number that you can be reached at. Some people still have a landline to their home phone and a cell phone. Which one of those is most likely the one that you're going to answer? Then, all right, Denise, thank you for clarifying that. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Your email address, make sure that's professional, first name, last name, and then, of course, whoever the email provider is, you want to stick with something that is professional, the most professional possible, and that is usually your first name, your last name, some variation of that. And then, of course, if you have any other portfolios, your LinkedIn, maybe, again, if you're in a arts kind of field, maybe you have an online portfolio, whatever that may be, you can include that as well. And then you want to include a line. You want to include that line so that it breaks up and separates your contact information from the rest of that cover letter. And remember, try to keep it formatted to the same way that you used your on your resume. So what you see here, this is a traditional, it's centered, and it's in a Christmas tree kind of format. You don't have to do that. I'm just using it as a demonstration. Next, you want to include the date that this is going to be sent. I've seen it where it was dated 3 months ago when that person applied to the position to that day. So we have to be careful about this. Attention to detail, every little thing matters. And believe it or not, whoever's reading these are going to be looking at this. The name, your name, the name of that person, Denise. And we'll talk about how we're going to find that here in a moment. And then all the rest of the contact information, as much as possible. Do you need that person's email address? Not necessarily. If you can't get it, then that's fine. But we'll talk about some ways in which to kind of gather that information. But you want to put as much information. Now we're talking about, this is a traditional letter type. We'll talk about how to email or the email format here in a few minutes. This is if you're uploading it to the applicant tracking system, or maybe you're going to the interview and you're handing over a hard copy. Well, we want to make sure that it is in the traditional format, what I'm showing you here. We'll talk about the variation, email variation here in a few moments. So from here, now we're going to talk about addressing it to that particular person, the greeting. If you don't know the gender of who you're sending this, or they might have a gender neutral name, it's best to go with first name and last name. Dear Taylor Smith. That way, there's no confusion at all. If you know what the gender, if that person's gender is, or what that person's gender is, Miss or Mr. Those are standard. And don't use Mrs. unless you know that is the preferred. The hiring manager's name, if it's unknown, there's different ways in which you can find this information out. I would start by giving the recruiter a call, calling HR, and just asking, to whom would I address my cover letter to? You can also use Google. LinkedIn is a great resource. So if you want to, after you call HR or the recruiter and get that information, you may want to back it up by bouncing it off of LinkedIn or Google as well. And there's sometimes that you're not going to find this information out. So then you can address it to the team or that department or the department head. Someone in that department usually is going to be responsible for reviewing resumes along with HR and et cetera, et cetera. But one thing we definitely want to avoid is using the generic "to whom it may concern" or "dear hiring manager." That is perceived as being lazy. So we just don't want to go through that whole thing. We want to make sure that we at least attempt to find that the name of that person. Does that help, Denise? Next.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to type it or say it.
That's fine.
Do you want me to type or say?
Either or, which is best for you.
So I'm gonna say, yes, it's helpful because I have been doing Dear Hiring Manager, so I'll stop doing that. But what I am applying to very, very large companies. So I was typing this. If you're not 100% sure you have it right, would you suggest going with the Dear Department Head Accounting Manager? And that's what I would say. If you're not 100% sure, I'd rather not look stupid or get it wrong. Because I'm having a really difficult time with the companies I'm applying to.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The department or the department head, that's fine. That's acceptable. Remember, someone in that department will probably receive that after HR has screened the applications, and they're going to be they're understanding, especially if they're not posting it. Sometimes I know hiring managers just didn't want their name attached because they would be inundated with a bunch of emails, and then of course LinkedIn and et cetera, et cetera. So there are hiring managers out there, and there are organizations that don't specifically have a person associated with that. So to answer your question more specifically, yes, that's acceptable to address it to the department or the department head. Thank you for that question. Moving to the cover letter body, the introduction of the cover letter. And I recently did a Tuesday talk talking about effective resume writing. And I described in detail why the top 1/3 of the resume is so important. And it's on YouTube, so I will give you that information and I would encourage you to go back and look at that. Just the same, the top 1/3 of your cover letter is just as important. This is where you are going to get the interest of the reader. You have to do it in a very, very short time frame. So we are grabbing the attention of the hiring manager in the first couple of sentences. We want to let them know what we're applying for. Yes, if you're applying through the applicant tracking system, it's pretty much a given because your application and your resume and cover letter are associated with that particular position. But that's, generally speaking, we want to make sure that they understand what we're applying for. And then, of course, you have to align your knowledge, skills, and abilities with the position immediately up front. And then end that first paragraph with a value statement. What do you bring to the position? What would you bring to that organization? And this is an example. Here, the position I'm applying to, like I discussed, then alignment of the skills with the position. This is so important. You have to get this. If you don't do this, then you're not enticing that reader to continue more. And then lastly, what do you bring to the table when it comes to knowledge, experience, and your abilities to accomplish certain tasks? Once we are done with that first paragraph, that is really what in sales would be called the hook. Now that we have gained their interest, we want to connect our qualifications with the specific role. So this is basically going to be your qualifications paragraph. And you can write this in paragraph format. I find that bullet points, like we would establish bullet points in our resume, are more effective because it draws that reader's eye to what you want to tell them. And just like we would do our bullet points, when we talked about effective resumes, how we put the action and results in a bullet point, we're going to do the same thing in the cover letter. Do not copy and paste the exact words from your resume into the cover letter. So if you have specific accomplishments that you want to point out, you want to draw the reader's attention to, make sure you vary your action verbs and synonyms and rephrase that statement so that it's not a copy and paste from your resume. You can use those accomplishments because we want to make sure that we put the top information, our key talking points, into the cover letter. So you want to vary that information, but you still can put key accomplishments and achievements in there. And then, of course, give examples of your work experience and quantify using metrics any achievement results. So essentially the same way that we would outline in our resume our key achievements, we want to do the very exact same thing in the resume, just say it a little differently. Here's an example of that. And underlined in green are our action verbs. And then, of course, our quantified results using metrics. Numbers draw the reader's eye, and they can easily understand the impact of the result by using numbers. So whenever and wherever possible, we want to make sure that we include some sort of metric. That is the qualification paragraph. From this point, we are looking to align the company, our knowledge of the company, and the fit that we will have in that particular organization. So we've hooked them, we've given them, and we've shown how effective we can be. Now we want to align our fit to that organization. So this is done in a very, very structured way. Here we're going to use the job posting to identify the company's needs. And I've done a Tuesday talk on how to decipher job postings. It's on YouTube. Again, I will cover that a little bit later on, how you can get to it. A quick snippet on that. The job posting is like the roadmap to the particular position. It's going to give you the information, generally speaking, what you need in order to develop your marketing materials to sell your skill set to that particular employer. And this is how you do it. You're going to focus on 2 or 3 critical skills and keywords. And then you're going to use that to showcase your experience. You have to link your knowledge, skills, and abilities to that position and show that you are the right person for that job. This is how you do that. Bolded in dark blue are key skills and keywords that were present in a job posting. So I am using those, but I'm also linking it to my background and how I've developed those to help my past organizations. Maybe this position, the hiring manager is looking for someone that has leadership skills as well as organization skills, can sell products, and has done maybe a little bit of training and has supervised. So I'm going to take those keywords and I'm going to plug them in to that particular paragraph, paying attention to how I link my knowledge, skills, and abilities to that role. Lastly, the closing, the sign-off. We want to give a call to action. What this means is we want to make a statement to the reader, inviting them to connect with us, to call us for that interview, to call and talk a little bit more about how we can best fit that role. That is what your call to action is. But before we do that, we want to restate our interest in the position, then include our call to action, as well as thank them for their time and considering our application. And then we're going to end with a signature. And you can do this using scan software. If you want to print it out, sign it, and upload it as a PDF, that's fine. If at all possible, we want to make sure that we have our signature on there. If you can't get your signature on there, type your first name and your last name. That's acceptable as well. And this is what that would look like. Remember, there's 4 spaces between that closing paragraph and your signature. So here we restate our interest in the position. We put that call to action, letting them know that I'm confident that I could possibly, that I'm going to be a good fit for this role, and then thank them for their time and consideration. From here, as I said before, this is a typical letter format. If we were printing it out and bringing that to an interview, if we were uploading it to a applicant tracking system, that is a traditional way that we do that. You may have an opportunity to send it directly to a hiring manager. If that's the case, we want to take and embed that into the email itself. So that's one less attachment that they have to open. And to do that, we're just going to take all that top level stuff before the greeting. We're just going to take all that information out. Your contact information will go in the signature block on the bottom. As you can see here, down here, that's where your contact information is going to go from there. And then we want to make sure that it's an easy to read font. You don't have to necessarily use the same one that's on your resume in the email because it's going to electronic. Now, if you're sending it to the recruiter and the recruiter may be forwarding that on, then you may want to stick to the PDF version and upload that as a PDF attachment. Because it's going to a third person. And then, of course, the key here is we definitely want to choose an appropriate subject line. Your name, your first name, your last name, the job title, cover letter, and if that position has some may have a number, a job number that's associated with it, we would want to include that in the subject line so that the person that's receiving it understands what the content is going to be, as well as how to forward that along if they need to. So in a nutshell, that's the basics of an effective cover letter. There's few other items that I'm going to talk about that may be situation dependent, but nonetheless, I think it's a great way to cover these. If you can be referred, and I will tell everyone this, you have to seek out referrals. If you joined me for my last Tuesday talk, I talked about being referred to positions. Their employers love it. They love it. And it's been shown through research by LinkedIn and other employment research that it's 55 times faster compared to hiring someone that is non-referred. You're 4 times more likely to be hired as a referral than over someone that is a non-referral. So employers, if it's coming from a trusted source, they're more likely to explore that source than someone that's applying via job board. So you have to keep this in mind. And then, of course, employers have reported that 88% of those referrals are above average applicants. Good stuff. Keep that in mind. So how do we include a referral in the cover letter? We want to start with who we know and then determine their connection to the job that you're applying to. So if we find someone on LinkedIn, which is fine, there's a whole process, and I have a Tuesday talk that's going to discuss about how to use LinkedIn, and referrals will be part of that. But if you can find someone in that organization and make a connection with them, ask them for a referral. But it has to be someone that is closely associated with that department. So if they are loosely associated with it, it won't carry the same weight and value as someone that may be working in that department. So we have to consider that. So what is their connection? Ask the person before you use them in your cover letter. We don't want people to be blindsided, and hiring managers are probably, especially if it is a current employee, going to ask them how they are associated or how do they know you. And then, of course, send them a copy of the cover letter and your resume so that they are familiar with your background and what you're going to say in that particular cover letter. This is how you would name drop. You want to use that person's name right up there in the top. Remember that top 1/3, where you want to use that in the first or second line of that cover letter. Now, keep in mind, we're starting to add things to this cover letter. So we don't want to bloat it. We want to keep it within that 250 to 400 words. So if you need to shorten some of your cover letter in order to fit this information in there, look at ways. You don't want to cut that super important content, but we want to make sure that we fit this information in as well. And then, of course, describe how that person and you are connected and why they are recommending you. So if you had worked on a previous project together, maybe it was volunteer work, maybe you actually worked with them, maybe they were a contractor, whatever it might have been, we want to make sure that we link our skills to that particular person and that position. This is what something like that might look like. Justine Kelly is the one that is my referral, and I will give a little bit of detail as to how I know that person and how my skills might necessarily align. So all you want to do, remember, you're name dropping, so you want that at the top of the resume. There may be times when you might get asked about salary requirements. Mostly small businesses use this type of as a screening process. If you're asking for way too much, then you're probably going to screen yourself out. If you're asking for way too low, well, they might not necessarily consider you because they may feel that you don't necessarily know what your value is, or you may be underqualified. This is tricky regardless, and there's many methods, and I have a Tuesday talk that's going to focus specifically on how to negotiate salary. If you are asked this, there are a number of methods. You can give a target number. You can say you're flexible, or you're open to negotiation. You can give a salary range. One thing you have to remember is this is a risk. If you don't provide it, they may screen you out as a failure to follow simple instruction. So that's the risk. So you have to weigh those things. Nonetheless, we want to make sure that we do our research. And here are a couple of sites: salary.com, PayScale, the BLS, Bureau of Labor and Statistics, Glassdoor, whichever one. We want to do a little bit of research so that we are sure that we have a good understanding of quite possibly what they might be offering. And then, of course, again, include flexibility and you're open to negotiation. If you include a salary, make sure it's the top end. Make sure your bottom number is the top end of what you've researched. As most can attest, what's your bottom number? They're probably going to start with that first. So if maybe you were doing research and they said that the position is 50 to 60, you might be making 45 right now. We want to make sure 60 is that minimum number. All they can do is say no. You want to give yourself room so that you can negotiate. Lastly, you have to be realistic, because if you're way out of the ballpark, you're probably not going to make that selection. Here's an example of what that might look like in a resume. And we want to, again, make sure that we are open to negotiation and let them know that we are flexible based upon, other benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But you want to make sure that you do your research. Now, I coach a lot of military and military spouses. This is applicable to, other situations as well. However, when we include relocation, there is a specific, we want to do this carefully. We want to be thoughtful, but we want to do this carefully. You have three options included in the beginning, in the middle, or the end. And it really depends on how you want to address this. So if you have a pretty well-established timeline and you're pretty familiar, say you're going back to your home of residence before you were in the military, and you have your family back there, well, tell them a little bit about that. The reason is because employers are going to want to know, why are you relocating? And if you're relocating to a place that you're familiar with and you have some ties located there. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're on orders and you're a military spouse that you can't do this. It just means you have to be thoughtful on how you're going to do this. So in these options, before you put or mention your relocation, you want to make sure that you express your interest in the position before you state that you're going to be relocating. And then always explain very briefly, you don't have to go into detail about this, but what your relocation plan is. If you have a date, a time frame associated with that, by all means include that. So we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about why the cover letter is important. We've talked about the structure, the format. We've talked about the contents of that, as well as mentioned a few things such as salary, relocation, and having a referral. There are times when you just don't include a cover letter. And those times are if you're genuinely not interested in the position. Believe me, it will reflect. So if you're not interested in that position, it's probably best that you don't include if it is an option. When you're specifically asked not to, some employers will put in their job posting, do not submit a cover letter. And if you do, you might be eliminated because failure to follow simple instruction. What about, and obviously if you don't have time to customize it, again, that goes back to point number one, lastly, if there's no place to upload the cover letter, then they're probably not expecting it. There's a way to get around this, and I've done this as well. I've attached it and uploaded it as part of my resume. So I might have the first page and second page of my resume, and then the third page is a cover letter. It's a little bit risky, but nonetheless, those are generally the times when you probably don't want to include a cover letter. I want to take this moment before we wrap it up to invite everyone to our next Tuesday talk, which is going to be on September 6th, and we're going to talk about effective job search strategies. So if you found what we've talked about in cover letters and resumes to be helpful, this is going to be just as helpful, and could quite possibly, you can use these strategies in your job search immediately. And you can join us. We have future Tuesday talks coming up here, working with recruiters. This is an excellent resource, as well as how to think like an employer. It's all about your mindset. So if you've been thinking like a job seeker, I'm going to show you how to think like an employer and view things from the employer's perspective. And then if you haven't done research on companies before and you haven't been doing them, do you really want to work at that organization? Going to show you how to go through and research companies. And then, of course, if you're considering doing a job change or a career change, let's talk about reinventing your career. And you can visit us at vsnusa.org/events, or you can use the QR code. And as I mentioned before, the Tuesday Talk playlist, there's a QR code there. You can go into YouTube, type in Easter Seals DC MDVA, and that will bring you to our channel. And then, of course, you can click on our playlist. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. Some key takeaways. Consider those important things about the cover letter. Remember, your cover letter is complementing your resume, so you want to go a little bit beyond what the resume has to offer. Take out those 2 to 3 critical skills, match it to the job, highlight those achievements. Those are going to be so much more important than just telling them how much you really like the company. Format the cover letter properly. It goes back to attention to detail. Proofread and edit. Have someone edit or go through and read your information. Make sure it is grammar and spelling correct, and it doesn't have any typos in it. And then, of course, seek opportunities to be referred. That's going to be a big ticket item. All right, at this point, I'm going to open up the floor for any questions. I want to thank everyone for your time and your attention. And if you have any questions after this, or one pops up in your head, please feel free to reach out to me. Here is my information. And if you are looking or you would like a one-on-one session, feel free to contact me and we can schedule it.